Can you get the most of what the new $13,000 Trek Madone Generation 8 offers you from a model like this one that costs half as much? And how does it compare to a top-tier pure aero road bike and to an endurance bike for a rider who just wants to go faster? In this review, I'll answer those questions based upon riding this Madone Generation 8 SL7 model that costs $6,500, that Nate, a fast aero bike rider, and me, an endurance bike rider, what we found during tests of this bike. Hi, I'm Steve from In the Know Cycling, the independent, ad-free, sponsor-free, and subscription-free YouTube channel and website that helps enthusiasts figure out what gear to get and where to get it. Okay, let's roll. This, as I mentioned, is the SL7 Generation 8. It's the third tier model. At the top of the range is the SLR9 that sells for $13,000. There's an SLR7 that sells for about $9,000. And then this one is the SL, not R, but just SL7 that sells for $6,500. This bike comes set up with an Ultegra 8100 12-speed Di2 with 50-34 chain rings up front and an 11-34 cassette in the back. This medium-large size has a 172.5 millimeter crank. It has the Bontrager Aeolus Pro 51 wheels with the R3 hard-case Lite tires. The maximum width on this bike is 32 millimeters, although to me it looks like it could take something wider than that. There's a two-piece aero bar and stem combination up front. At the hoods it measures 38 centimeters wide. At the drops about 42 centimeters. It's got a 100 millimeter long stem, and it has a T47 bottom bracket. It weighs in just over 8 kilograms, or about 17.5 pounds. So that's a description of the specs, the raw details, if you will, and it compares to the $13,000 model, the SLR9, which has a AXS Groupset, has a one-piece bar stem. It has the Aeolus RSL 51 wheels, and a few other doodads, including a higher modulus carbon, and it weighs in at about a kilogram less than this one. You have to ask yourself, are those upgrades worth the another $6,500 you pay for the bike and the additional pound that you save from it? Or could you save a pound somewhere in the middle of your bod? So that's what the bike is. Question is, who is it for? Trek with this bike tried to combine an aero bike, the prior Madone, with an Amanda, their light climbing bike. So is this a bike for aero riders? Is it a bike for road racers who want to do some fast climbing as well as aero riding? Is it a bike for fast group riders? Is it a bike for light climbers? Or is it a bike for endurance riders who just want to ride faster by getting on a faster bike? My fellow tester Nate and I tested this bike separately. He's one of those guys that's a fast group rider, that's a hell of a good climber, that rides an aero bike currently and has done his fair share of racing. He's a guy that's compared it to his specialized Venge, a pure aero bike, and I've compared it to some of the Parley endurance bikes that I've ridden. Nate, what do you think about this bike?
This bike feels real nice under you. Feel like I can kind of cruise through rough pavement without feeling like I'm skipping over bumps quite as much as I'm used to with my other bike. So yeah, it's definitely a more planted feel, a little bit more compliant frame. It turns real nicely. It's definitely lively in the turns, and I think going around corners when it's a little bit rough, gonna be more confident in that type of situation than I'm used to with my aero bike that that might be a little bit more floating across bumps and not quite as planted down onto the road as this one. When you're climbing out of the saddle on this bike, it does feel a little bit more efficient. The wheelbase is a little bit shorter, and I think that that just kind of flows better with my kind of natural resonance when I'm stomping on the pedals back and forth. So it springs springs ahead a little bit more with each pedal stroke, it feels like. That said, in a more gradual uphill climb where you're not up out of the saddle and you're just kind of going straight and trying to hold your momentum, I think an aero bike is probably superior in that situation. Fast descents, you're coming down a mountain pass or something like that, especially when the road quality is not great. I often feel like my aero bike is a little squirrely, especially if there's kind of high winds. So I tend to take it a little easier on those types of situations, whereas on this bike, I did have a chance to come down some tight turns on a downhill and felt real natural just leaning into those corners and not being as concerned about rough pavement kind of throwing me off. So this definitely would be the bike of choice if I was living in a more mountainous area and I was doing a lot of riding in the mountains. That said, maybe in those types of cases, a pure climbing bike that's that doesn't really have any aerodynamic design might be the superior choice. This bike has an Ultegra Di2 Groupset on it. I was impressed with the brakes. I recently on my own bike upgraded from the ETAP Red to the newest Red AXS and really liked the brake improvement on that group set. I've really turned into kind of a SRAM fan lately, and the things that I noticed that I don't like about the Di2 system really kind of come down to the buttons need more force to get them to actuate. The SRAM buttons just are a little bit lighter touch. I like the ability to swap the front derailleur and the rear derailleur battery if I ever get to a point where the rear derailleur battery runs out. I've got a spare kind of just waiting there on the front that's highly likely to be still full given the amount of front derailleur shifting I would do locally in my area. With the Di2 system, they're both on the same battery, and once the battery's out, then you're pretty much out of luck. I did reconfigure the shifting on this bike before my first ride so that it's more SRAM-like, so that the left hand is moving the cassette to the bigger sprockets and the right shifter is moving the cassette to the lower sprockets. And then I reprogrammed the little top buttons on the hoods here to be my front derailleur shifting, which I use very rarely. If you do want a SRAM group set for a Madone, you have to either go up a level or go down a level because the SL7 doesn't have that as an option. It's only Shimano. I did review the new SRAM RED AXS Groupset a couple months ago, and you can click the link up on the left here to get that full review. Another thing I dislike about this bike, which I noticed quite a bit initially, was that it just happens to bump my toe a lot more with the front wheel. And not being used to that, it ends up being a little bit disconcerting, to say the least. Not an issue when you're riding because you're not turning the wheel that much, but if you're going kind of on a slow, U-turn type of pace, or trying to do a track stand and keep your balance at a stoplight, and you're really turning the handlebars a little bit more than you would, bumping up against the toe there, almost makes you crash or fall over. So that's something that would have to, you'd have to get used to it. This bike has upgraded water bottles and water bottle cages that are typically from the next grade up SLR bike. Not really an upgrade I would recommend making. And I think if I were just going to stick with normal standard bottle cages and bottles, it would make more sense for this type of bike. Unfortunately, they have narrower openings in the mouth, so it's kind of hard to get your ice cubes in there. Certainly harder to wash them out when you're trying to get some sports drink out than a wider mouth, more traditional water bottle. And you go to put it back in the water bottle cage, and you have to think about which way am I rotating it, because it's got this kind of rectangular shape. So if you were really trying to save a half a watt, I can understand the design selection of wanting to take that out in the water bottles, but this isn't a bike that's really designed for pure aerodynamics, so I just feel like make it an all-around bike and make it a little bit easier to use by going with standard water bottle cages. And not that you can't put a a water bottle cage on here, like a standard one, but that's probably the first thing I would do if this were my bike. The cages themselves, you know, they claim that that they can be used for standard bottles, but they don't really hold a standard bottle quite as securely as just a normal water bottle cage. I really feel like the straight line speed of this bike, the Madone, has a lot left to be desired compared to my Aero Venge bike. Used to having a difference in the aero sensation after testing a lot of different wheels of various depths over the years. I'd say the difference between this bike and what I'm used to is more dramatic than just the differences I would feel from wheel to wheel. So I think maybe it's more of the frame, maybe it's just more of the stiffness. That probably is the #1 disadvantage from a ride feel, in my opinion. This bike is really for people that are, you know, race focused and want to go fast, that have resources for one bike or a garage space for one bike, and can't really have a climbing bike and an aero bike at the same time. And in that case, great bike. Feels really nice under you. It's a nice, compliant and comfortable build. I feel like I could probably ride it all day and not get worn out just from the extra kind of harsh feeling that a stiffer bike would have, especially if the pavement wasn't that great. For me personally though, I've got the means to have an extra bike for climbing, and most of the rides I do in my local area are, you know, straight, smooth, and not very hilly roads. And so that's really the ideal type of road to have an aero bike on. And when I'm reaching for a bike for an everyday ride, I'm picking my aero bike instead of this one.
As an endurance rider, I typically ride a bike whose bars are a whole lot taller than this one. My fitter, Andy from Landry's and Natick, who fits all my bikes and has done so for years, said, you're only going to have to get down about 45 millimeters more than you normally do. And it took me a couple weeks for my back to get used to that. A lot of foam rolling, a lot of stretching and yoga, and that helped. But after a while, I did get used to it and found myself much further down in position and really enjoying the speed that came with a more aero position. Honestly, what took me a little bit more to get used to was going from the 42 millimeter wide bars from hood to hood on my regular endurance bikes to the 38 millimeter ones on this one. But when I did, I found I actually liked the position, and found when I get back on my endurance bike that the bars definitely feel wide. So a combination of being in more aero position, having a little bit narrower bars, and also perhaps being on a faster bike does make me feel a whole lot faster. The bike is also very stiff, and positively stiff. I find I can accelerate and handle much faster on this bike than I can on my endurance bike. But it's not a pure aero bike in the way I traditionally think about aero bikes. It's not uncomfortable, it's actually quite comfortable. And of course, it's a good looking bike. It's a very attractive bike. The two-tone paint job and the glossy paint is really attractive and gets a lot of looks. That makes you enjoy your ride somewhat more. It makes you perhaps feel a little faster and ride a little faster. So for all those reasons, the more aero position, the narrower bars, the stiffer bike for acceleration and handling, and the comfort when you're going over rough terrain, in addition to a good-looking bike, makes me a faster rider on the bike. Now, I'll admit that for the first 2 weeks when I was getting used to the new position and getting my back more comfortable doing longer rides on this bike, I wasn't really thrilled with the wheels or the tires. Now, these wheels are the Bontrager Aeolus Pro 51 carbon wheel set, a wheel set I would put in the value carbon category. It's a wheel set we've reviewed before, but not rated super highly. And it's one of the ways that Trek is probably able to save money on this bike, and which adds probably 150 grams or so to the weight of it. The tires are R3 hard case Lite tires, also a set of tires we've reviewed before. A good set of training tires, but not nearly as fast as, say, the Continental GP 5000 STR tires, which we like and recommend. So to get better speed I set up this bike with two different sets of wheels over my testing period. First with a set of reserve 52-63 wheels, a more aero wheel set, and they clearly rode faster right away. And then later with a pair of black ink wheels, 48-58. Those wheels are, as I mentioned, the depth, 48 in the front, 58 in the back, but they're also about 200 grams lighter than both the Pro 51 that comes stock with this wheel set and the deeper reserve 52-63 wheels. And with those lighter wheels, I could really feel the stiffness of the bike combined with the power that I get out of my legs carry me uphill and accelerate uphill really quite well. So the stiffness of this bike with the right wheel set can really put you into a good climbing position as well as a better aero position than is offered by the stock wheels and tires. The other thing I think Trek could do a lot better with this Madone SL7 model is integrating the brake cables up front. This, yes, is a two-piece bar stem, which again probably cuts the cost a fair amount. It's supposed to be an aero bike, and I think it's primarily an aero bike, more of an aero bike than a climbing bike for sure. So they should make better efforts, even at this level, to integrate those cables up front. I would also have liked to have seen, at least on the high-end model, a power meter. I wouldn't expect that on the $6,500 model, but at least with higher-end models now, $13,000 models, you'll see them put on, say, a 4-eyes power meter, or if you're getting a Force or Red version, getting a Quark power meter. So I changed that out when I tested this bike to put on my 4-eyes power meter. The higher end bike also comes with the Aeolus RSL cotton tires, ones that I also was able to test on this bike. I'm not sure if it's as fast or any faster than the Conti GP 5000 STR tubeless tires. They're comfortable, they handle well, but I found out as comfortable as the Vittoria Pro tires that we've also reviewed. You can find links to all the components that I've mentioned in the description box below, and you also see there the stores I recommend that you can buy your gear at and help support the channel. Well, at the end of the day, is this a bike that I, a B group level enthusiast rider, would buy? Well, it's certainly a fast bike, a good looking bike, stiff, handles well, and really has a lot to offer. But for me, I think it's probably not the best fit. I'm probably losing some power by having to get down in position. The hip angle isn't ideal to get the most power that's left in my legs, and probably best suited to someone who's going to be riding much faster than the 18 to 20 miles an hour that I normally average. I hope you appreciate the perspectives that Nate and I brought to this video. If you did, feel free to like and subscribe below to help others find this channel and the reviews we've done. We've done other reviews of bikes and other gear that you can see above. Thanks, we'll see you again on the next video.